Well, now let's welcome Professor William Lawrence for more on this. He teaches political science and international affairs at George Washington University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So this free trade deal is meant to reduce tariffs and trade rules and create jobs for a market of 1.2 billion people on the continent. But what needs to happen to make that a reality?
Well, first of all, Nigeria has to join. So they've been on the fence, and there's a number of consultations they've been having and some rather strident comments by some of the interest groups in Nigeria. But the consensus view is that Nigeria will join. And as with all trade agreements, the devil's in the details. All of the countries will be adding annexes. Only 90% of goods will be tariff-free. So what about the 10%? How are they protecting certain industries? There's worries about dumping. There's worries about rules of origin, where things come from. So there's a lot that needs to be worked out. I've been amazed how quickly this has moved. I mean, basically in 1 year, all these countries have ratified, and we're moving very quickly towards an agreement. But the details of that agreement have yet to be worked out.
And it's interesting, you mentioned Nigeria, which is obviously Africa's largest economy, and along with Benin and Eritrea, have chosen not, at least not yet, to ratify the agreement. What do you think is giving them the biggest pause in signing on?
Well, first we thought it was the elections in Nigeria, and there was some question about whether this would become an elections issue. But you know, as I was reading in the latest statements that were made for this interview, it appears to me that it's really just a question about getting enough. There's going to be a certain number of Algerians who will be against it, but the majority of Nigerians will benefit because free trade across the society is beneficial. So it's mostly about getting enough Nigerian groups that are might be negatively impacted, interested in it, and then offering them some protection. So for example, within that 10% of goods that wouldn't have tariffs removed, Nigeria can protect manufacturers, they can protect certain labor unions, they can protect certain products. They're worried about a lot of things. They're even worried about goods from China coming in that are mislabeled as goods from other countries. You know, there's a lot of things that need to be worked out. So part of this is just Nigerian politicians demonstrating to various Nigerian interest groups that they will not be major losers, and if there are things to be worked out, you know, they'll be included in the negotiations.
And that's interesting, this concept of winners and losers. Obviously, you have a very diverse continent, over 50 countries, different levels of economic development, and also different needs. And then when you look at a free trade area like the EU, you see that there are some winners and losers economically. Some are prospering, others on the brink of recession. Who do you see potentially as the biggest winners and losers on the African continent?
Well, certainly the small landlocked countries, the island countries, all the countries that are sort of on the margins of full economic development, them getting better integrated is the big positive. And Africa has a lot going on. I'm sure you're aware of all the migrations going on and various population flows. This will eventually lead towards free movement of people, which will solve some problems, a single currency. There's a lot of big plans here for this agreement. But in the short term, it'll allow certain marginal countries to become more part of a common African market, a common African project together. I think the countries that were slowest to sign, South Africa, Nigeria, this is the classic case of the big economies. And big economies are usually under the most potential threat from competition. So you're talking about Nigerian manufacturing. How will manufacturers be protected from deficient projects coming in from weaker economies, for example? Right. So all that has to be worked out.
Now, in terms of preparing for some of these changes, what should governments as well as private enterprises really be doing to position themselves to take advantage of some of the opportunities and also prepare for the challenges?
Well, each sector has its own dynamics, so you have to go sector by sector. And this agreement will have big annexes and big exceptions, but certainly I think each sector and each business has to look at, you know, how can I benefit from free trade and how can I hedge against the downside that may affect me. Trade flows within Africa are quite low. Trade flows between Africa and the rest of the world are quite low, but the upside potential is enormous. Africa's population is expected to double over the next couple of decades. We have a huge growth, GDP growth across the continent, and so the upside potential is incredible here. But again, in any changing economic environment, you can be surprised by competition, and so this is what any single business has to look out for. You know, which competitor could cause me problems, and what protections do I have against that new competition?
Certainly a lot of cautious optimism to be had there. Thank you so much, Professor William Lawrence there of George Washington University.